Here in Melbourne, Australia, there's a very important landmark very close to me, a couple of suburbs over from where I live. Here it is. This rather rugged 1974 7-storey car park in Carlton on the corner of Grattan Street and Cardigan Street, close to the University of Melbourne. A good, honest slab of concrete just a stone's throw from all that Melbourne's inner city has to offer. This is a pretty nice example of brutalist architecture. The raw, exposed concrete, the monumental pretense which gives way to some very fine detail on closer inspection. Zooming back out, my personal favourite, the small row of stupid little windows giving it a really good go along just the top floor. It's fun. Kind of. And if you like fun, you're in luck, because back in 2023, this car park was given a heritage listing, with the report from Planning Panels Victoria holding, as a car park, it is striking, robust and bold. And quoting another survey from the Heritage Alliance, it's probably one of the most architecturally interesting examples of its type in Victoria. David Wagner, president of the Australian Institute of Architects Victorian chapter, was also supportive. He stated that the building serves a very useful function, being a car park. The thing is though, we can build car parks underground, and there are a lot of other transport options in that part of the city. And even if protecting this car park does bring joy to a very small number of very visible architecture enthusiasts, it's hard to work out who would have benefited if the site had been put to a different use. The City of Melbourne is trying to decrease the number of cars in the area. It's trying to improve walkability, and there's a widely acknowledged and well-documented shortage of housing across Australia's urban centres. So in this world, should we be protecting our car parks? If not, what should we be protecting? How many foregone homes is a brutalist car park worth? What about a busted up cottage? What about a public toilet? All of these things have been heritage listed, so they're valid questions to ask. And more recently, some of those questions finally have been asked, with new areas of Melbourne being rezoned to support more development. This has made a lot of people happy, specifically those people who want to prioritise new dwellings over preservation. But unsurprisingly, it's also upset the precise people you'd expect it to upset. Residents of villagey, previously preserved areas who want to maintain that sense of community and preserve the value of their own dwelling. I wonder who's right. I'm sure there's a nice clear-cut answer. Take a look at this map of Victoria, Australia. It's a fun one, lots of pink. The pink maps out the parts of Melbourne's inner and middle suburbs where there's a heritage overlay. Heritage overlays are planning controls that identify and protect places with local heritage significance by requiring a planning permit for certain development. A heritage overlay doesn't freeze a site in perpetuity. It doesn't mean that you can't do anything to that site ever, but it does mean that the owner requires a permit for certain changes. Demolition, new works, sometimes paint colour, sometimes tree removal. The permits on these things are meant to ensure the change is considered and not automatic, and not flying in the face of the character of the area. What this means though is that applications for these permits are often unsuccessful. These things, to a degree, freeze our cities in time. And sometimes, maybe, this is good. A way to preserve areas of historic or scientific or cultural significance, and to preserve that cultural value, to preserve the character of an area, to support the community and preserve their identity. Workers' cottages and big old banking buildings are part of a city's bigger urban story, and preserving some of that urban story is what makes a city special to observe and to visit. This happens everywhere. People go to Budapest to see all of the cobblestone streets and the old strange pastel angular buildings. People go to Seoul to see the preserved Hanok villages and the palaces and stuff scattered throughout that city. They go to Beijing to see the chairman, yeah, but they also go to see the hutongs, the narrow streets which have become increasingly protected and which date back to the Yuan dynasty of the 1200s. Similar stuff, on a different scale, happens in Australia. I did have someone I know recently say that they don't understand why Australia bothers to protect any buildings at all, and his argument was essentially, I don't think anyone who wants to protect Australian buildings has spent much time in Europe. Australia doesn't know what it means to have really old buildings. Now let's be charitable and assume we're not applying this to any areas of Indigenous significance, just the buildings that have appeared since colonisation. And sure, there aren't any hutongs from the 1200s floating around Perth, but how do we reckon those buildings got so old in the first place? Maybe it's because no one took them down. I think it's reasonable to have some sort of scheme in place to make sure our techno-feudalist rulers of the 2100s don't demolish the Sydney Opera House, or the Royal Exhibition Building, or even the Abbotsford Convent, or whatever you like that's close to you, to make way for another data plant or EV repair mega-centre. I like to think that we might want to put some guardrails in place for those situations. I like these places. we should keep some of them. And a lot of the time we can do this in a way that doesn't really impede development, like the nice old frontages that still exist in the CBD, but which are essentially entrance points to the skyscrapers right behind. The question we're dealing with isn't one of whether we should or shouldn't protect areas of cultural or historic or aesthetic significance. It's a question of where on the spectrum we draw the line. Where on the continuum between the Opera House and the 7-storey Carlton car park we draw the line and say, okay, that's about enough freezing things in time, thanks. Because where we are at the moment, somewhere even further along the continuum than the 7-storey Carlton car park, also carries consequences. Yeah, no surprise, the main consequence of all of this pink is that it stops a lot of development. It places an artificial cap on the number of new dwellings that can go up in an area. It's kind of hard to tell how much of a problem this actually is, but the Centre for Urban Research in Melbourne had a go back in 2015. They modelled the maximum dwelling yield for the 3,291 lots over 2,000 square metres along tram lines under the prevailing zoning allocations. These lots are some of the most convenient in the city, close to amenities or close to the transport which can get you to them. The centre found that if we exclude any heritage considerations, the maximum yield for these lots was 81,895 dwellings. But in practice, we can take away 63% of these potential dwellings thanks to an overlay of some description. That leaves us with just over a third of the original number of possible dwellings, only 29,822 rather than 81,895. Nearly 2/3 of potential dwellings on the best located lots in Melbourne may not exist thanks to an overlay. Now, there are a lot of things contributing to the Australian property market's various peculiarities. A lot of things contributing to the fact that despite Australia being one of the most developed and sparsely populated countries in the world, it still has parcels of land sitting on floodplains selling for $700 billion each. Everyone has a favourite reason for this. I won't go into all the favourites here, except for one, the question of supply. Are there enough houses? A lot of people don't think so. A lot of people think there aren't enough houses, including the people who think that the heritage restrictions are too strong. The interesting thing is, in general, houses per person have actually increased. This isn't something people seem to talk about that much, so let me say it again. You did hear me correctly. The supply of dwellings in Australia has generally grown faster than the population over the past few decades. Look, there's only 2 spots where it hasn't. Houses per person have increased. But despite all of this, despite more housing supply, prices are still going haywire, and home ownership has completely tanked. Why are there more houses and a worse housing shortage? Well, it could be a bunch of things. It could be the channeling of heaps of new cash into the market for investment properties, with the demand from prospective landlords pumping up prices. But it could also be people spreading out and needing more houses, and smaller families, fewer nuclear families, covert home offices, that sort of thing. And it could also be construction costs going up, and developers making speculative decisions to build despite these higher input costs. In truth, it's probably all of these things. Plus, one more. It could be that despite more homes being built, they're not being built in the places where people need them or want them. Places like those 81,895 lots on Melbourne's existing tram routes, of which an overlay of some description cuts their yield by 2/3. It's possible, I would think, that this isn't quite the balance we want. So Melbourne, where I live, has its pools and its stereotypes. The trams, the alleyway cafes, the nights that go for as long as you'd like them to, the gardens. It's known for its liveliness. But that liveliness that it's known for and that people want to come and experience, that's just a slice of the whole actual city. There's a small percentage of the city comprising those lively pockets. And these pockets are the entirety of what most visitors see. Less visible is the expanse of suburbanite, free, detached houses, carpeting the land for kilometres in every direction. It just keeps going. Far enough out that the commute times are punitive for anyone travelling into the city, but also far enough out that they're beginning to function as satellite cities themselves, breaking the idea that Melbourne is really a single coherent entity. A lot of the time, living a bit further away from the city is a genuinely sensible choice, making that trade from a shorter commute to a bit more space, a bit more quiet, a bigger backyard. That's fine. But a lot of people, at the moment, don't necessarily want to make that choice, but they're being forced to make that choice anyway. In the inflated housing market of a country experiencing strong, consistent population growth, a lot of the time the suburbs are the only choice. And the reason they're the only choice a lot of the time is in large part thanks to what's known as Australia's missing middle. At the 2021 census, about 70% of homes in Australia are separate detached houses. 16% are apartments, largely in inner cities, and the small remainder are townhouses. The missing middle are any of those homes between the separate freestanding detached dwellings and the apartments. The New South Wales government defines this as anything that's not freestanding and goes up to 30 dwellings per hectare. This is the missing middle. We're not building in the missing middle, and one reason that we're not is because much of where we'd expect the missing middle to sit is in established, well-located suburbs where the heritage overlays sit. Medium density is widely agreed to be the most context-sensitive way to add new homes that aren't 7 billion kilometres from the city centre. Done well, this is cheaper for infrastructure and better for walkability. It's the only way to ensure amenity at a cost for a growing population. But blanket or poorly targeted overlays can put a complete stop to this. They push growth to the fringes or right into the middle of the city, into those only viable at scale high-rises. Now you might say another way to handle this problem would be to cut the population, of which most of the growth comes through migration. A lot of people support this, a lot of them for very, very not so good reasons, but a lot of people just purely because they think that something more sustainable would be better for the country. This isn't the place to go into real detail on that, but I'll just say that Australia already runs a targeted migration program which prioritises in-demand skills for those migrants and their immediate families. Generally, the people who get brought in are brought in because they are going to contribute economically to the country. Closing those pathways off would come at an economic cost. I'm hesitant to go too much deeper with anyone who complains about all the consequences of permanent or temporary or whatever kind of migration, unless they're willing to also go up and train as an aged care worker or as a private taxi driver for their friends' burritos. The way to solve this is with more houses, in places where people want to live. And a growing acceptance of this is starting to form. The Victorian government recently announced plans to upzone 50 existing train and tram centres. Against the objections of residents from Brighton to Camberwell to Reservoir, they're planning to push ahead and allow more construction in these heavily protected areas. The opposition isn't surprising because the existing rules reflect the interests of existing residents. Residents who would rather their neighbourhoods stay as they are. Meanwhile, the prospective residents, the people who are looking for an opportunity to move into those areas, don't really have a say at the moment. They suffer in the silence of their sharehouse bedroom or their Newtown bungalow somewhere beyond where the trains terminate. So this is a step in the right direction. More homes where people want to live means lower prices and lower rents, and more people living in vibrant, walkable, service-rich communities. And it's more financially responsible too. It means less tax dollars spent building more wraparound infrastructure, which is between 2 and 4 times more expensive to build when you're out on the urban fringe. So there's a lot of virtue in building more homes in existing, developed areas close to the centre of our existing cities. The byproduct of this, to an extent, may be less heritage protection. Maybe the odd car park gets caught up in the mix. But that doesn't have to mean we're on a slippery slope to a bunch of broom closets going up in the Botanic Gardens. Nobody's going to put the missing middle in Ripponlea Estate. I'm sure they won't even reclaim your golf course. If the goal is more homes in the right places, we should care more about how we do heritage than whether or not we do it at all. Sharper overlays, testable statements of significance, actually using published guidance on recurring heritage issues, rewarding good design and the use of contextual materials in new developments. There's a lot more we can do on this too. This is just one piece of that broader puzzle. But just because there's a lot of pieces, it doesn't mean we should put the jigsaw puzzle in the bin. That's not helpful. Maybe our Carlton car park is striking, robust and bold enough to stand the test of time anyway. Maybe it can. Maybe it should. Maybe someone can explain it to me. Maybe, if you're game enough, you can make a better case than me for the 1974 brutalist concrete car park.